So this is Livy's video of why banning Steve jeopardizes the future of Smash, which I think is... I need to learn from that title. That's a hell of a title. So before we get into it again, I just want to mention, don't yell at these people. If I disagree with them, that does not mean shit on them. That doesn't mean go to their video and shit on their video. My opinion, like, it's not that serious. Like, it's really not that serious to, like, be mean to these people about it, regardless of if I disagree or not. So don't take me potentially being critical of their videos and just being like, hey, these people now suck. That's not how this works. The people in my comments, when I talk about Akala, that are like, Steve, he's f***ing carried, are obnoxious. I don't like you guys. I don't like when you do that. So I'm not on your side, even if I want Steve banned. I'm not on your side because I still respect Steve players.
2.5 months ago, my local Smash Ultimate community in Northeast Ohio banned Steve from practically all local and regional tournaments. This caused me to largely retire from the game, as out of principle, I wouldn't attend events where Steve was banned, as well as leave most online spaces where the Neo-Alt community gathered. While I had been primarily a Melee player for some time by then, I was an active member of the Alt community, having served on the Ohio PR panel for 2 seasons, as well as founded NeoStats. I received some surprised reactions when I left the scene in this way, considering I'd never played Steve in a serious tournament, meaning this ban didn't directly affect me in any way. The reason I had such a drastic reaction to the community's decision is because I believe this ban to have no legitimate logical backing behind it, and that its supporters are not only willing to reject and ignore the precedent set for bans laid out by the Smash community before them, but also to jeopardize the decades of work put in by the community's founders and figureheads.
This is a huge statement. The precedents are dumb. Half of the people in the community in Smash 4 that are now Ultimate players regret not banning Bayonetta. So being like, yeah, but you didn't ban Bayo doesn't mean that you shouldn't ban Steve. Because, like, Bayo was absurd. Smash 4 sucked. What a bad game.
My motives for writing this come not from a place of disdain for the players and TOs who support this movement, but from a place of love for the gaming community I poured half a decade of my life and uncountable amount of effort into. Without further ado, let's get into the reasoning behind the Steve ban and why I find these arguments to be unconvincing.
Just another point. Again, this isn't to shit on anyone. This isn't even to shit, like, I'm in the same camp. Individual people with opinions realistically don't matter. Like, I can go on Twitter and I can talk about Steve being broken and Steve being horseshit, or the opposite, Steve fucking sucks, he should never be banned. I'm one guy, right? It is more like, the biggest issue is more like, hey, people are watching community health, right? And the people that would do that are the people that run the tournaments and are in tune to their local scenes because they can tell how much people are complaining, how upset they are, how, like, the aura of the event has changed, the vibes, essentially. How many people have quit, how many people don't come back. That's why, like, again, I don't think Kazuya or Steve should be banned, or maybe I'm whatever on Steve. I really don't think Kazuya should be banned, but I'm not gonna hate on the Texas TOs for banning Steve when literally their entire scene is like, please fucking ban them. We hate this game when we play against them. And, like, yeah, is that a weak competitor mentality? Sure. Not everyone's trying to be the super amazing top competitor. Not everyone's trying to do that. It's fine.
In the context of competitive games, degeneracy can be defined as something that is void of the skills traditionally required to succeed at the game.
True.
The most obvious example of a degenerate strategy is wobbling. This can be considered degenerate because it allows ice climbers to bypass the traditional skills involved in the punish game. The second term to define is over-centralization. The most obvious example of over-centralization in Smash was the character Meta Knight in Brawl, a character so powerful that playing him was sometimes considered a requirement in order to succeed competitively.
I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration as a Brawl player, but yeah, he was fucked.
While there were a small number of characters capable of contesting Meta Knight, he was still so strong that by 2014, 4 of the 5 best Brawl players in the world.
I should have fucking been up here. This is horseshit. I was 6. I was right below this. I should have been number 5. I'm pissed about it.
Solo mates.
Still mad.
The Brawl community
10
was
years later
forced to make a decision. You could either keep Meta Knight legal and have only him and a few other characters be viable picks for those trying to win, or you could ban him, and many characters that he invalidated would suddenly become viable.
True.
The Brawl community failed to ever fully adopt a ban.
I was part of the Unity rule set committee that they're referencing here, and I voted to ban Meta Knight.
Not degenerate, and was commonly considered among the most fun and complex characters in Brawl.
Well,
the 2 examples
again, a lot of things about Meta Knight got banned because Infinite Dimensional Cape was banned. So was Planking, at a large degree. So was Scrooging. There was a lot of, and like most of his good stages were banned. So they actually did a lot to nerf Meta Knight, but then he was still broken.
Commonly considered among the most fun and complex characters in Brawl.
And then he downer camped. And all of that went away.
Bannable of the tiers, something that would be considered a Tier 3 violation is something that is degenerate but not over-centralizing, such as the Ice Climber's wobbling. A Tier 2 violation would be something that is over-centralizing but not degenerate, such as Meta Knight and Brawl. Tier 1, as you might have guessed, is something that is both over-centralizing and degenerate. There have been several Tier 1 violations in the history of Smash. Consider the existence of stages that allow for circle camping, the act of getting the lead and running away.
What is Scrooging? Scrooging was on Smashville. Since in Brawl, the platform moved from side to side, right? So, and it stops on the outside of the stage. So as Meta Knight, you would literally, his edge guarding was so good, right? And he could grab the ledge and his planking was amazing, which is ledge stalling. So you would literally go from the platform and then like it would start moving over the stage and you would just jump, use a couple jumps, glide under the stage, and then the platform like would move to the other side of the stage, and then you would land on the platform. So you basically just did this under the stage all the time. So at some point they were like, hey, you can only go under the stage once before you touch the ground, like the stage.
Away from the other player in a manner where it is impossible for them to catch up to you, eventually causing you to win by timeout. The Melee, Brawl, Smash 4, and Ultimate community's decision to ban stages that allow for circle camping shows that it's the community's responsibility to acknowledge flaws in the game's design. Let's start with whether or not Steve is over-centralizing, as it's the easier point to discuss.
Okay, so my read for this section is we're going to talk about usage charts, and then we're going to talk... Again, because I'm not pro Steve ban without PMLG, I know most of these points. But, like, the biggest issue is people talk about, like, oh, well, like, Steve's usage is only 3 point whatever percent it is, right? It's not higher than 3%, it's not lower than, like, 2.9%. But that's not because Steve isn't broken, that's just because the quality of the characters in this game is way higher than a game like Brawl. Regardless of Meta Knight, there were still only like 11 good characters. 10, like, the good characters in Brawl. I always forget one, so forgive me, but it's like Meta Knight, Ice Climbers, Olimar, Falco, Pikachu, Diddy Kong, Snake, Day-to-Day, Marth, Zero Suit, I feel like I'm missing one. Wario, thank you. Because like then you get into like the Wolf tier, which are kind of bad. Like, there's a significant drop-off after those. So there was 11 characters. Take out Meta Knight, there's 10. And, like, Meta Knight beat every character, but he wasn't always going to be the character that beat you the hardest, right? Wario's worst matchup wasn't Meta Knight, it was DDD. Fox's worst matchup wasn't Meta Knight, it was Pikachu and Ice Climbers and Falco. They were all pretty bad. Like, there was so many over-central, like, Olimar was a horseshit character. Ice Climbers were a horseshit character. Again, those two have been less horseshit if Meta Knight was banned, so then they would have the stages that Meta Knight basically forced to be banned because he was so broken on them be legal. Sure, that'd be great. But Meta Knight kind of was just above all the problems of Brawl, and also was a problem. But there was also still a ton of problems in Brawl. That game was so unbalanced.
For the first point of data, we'll compare the quantity of Meta Knight players in the 2014 Brawl rankings versus the number of Steve players on the 2022 Ult rankings. As you can see, it's not even really comparable, with Meta Knight players making up about half of all globally ranked players in Brawl.
Silly.
Of course, though, this isn't exactly a fair comparison, as Brawl contains significantly less characters than Ultimate. To mitigate this, we can normalize the data for roster size by multiplying the number of players for Meta Knight by the roster size of Brawl divided by the roster size of Ultimate. As you can see, Meta Knight had double the representatives in every category other than top 10, and when Steve's representation in top 10 can be boiled down to 2 players, it's easy to justify that as there simply being 2 very good players who happen to pick the same very good character.
This is true. That is a fair point, honestly. But again, then you have to also realize that you then would also have to divide it by the amount of good characters in the game. So you would divide the Brawl stuff by 10, and you would divide the Steve stuff by 60. As opposed to all the characters in the game, you would have to do the characters in the game that are good. That's why the numbers will never, ever, ever equal the same. Like, that's the main issue, is it's like, yeah, of course Steve's not going to have 10% usage, because there are 70 characters in this game. Like, 70 good characters in this game. Fucking me, Sword Fighter's a good character. I put the character in bottom 5. I put Ice Climbers in bottom 12, and they're probably at fucking high tier now. You can't expect, especially considering so many players don't have fun playing Steve, which is crazy to me, because I think Steve is so fun. Steve is incredibly fun, but, like, there's so many good characters in Ultimate that you can't expect anywhere near the same thing. Like, you should have expected, on average, like, regardless of strength of a character, 10%. Like, there's 11 characters that are good in Brawl. So, because, again, I would say 85% of the scene, especially the good players, played the relevant characters. And then maybe there was a Lucario, like 2 Lucarios. There was Lee Martin and Trella. And then you had, like, Seagull Joe, who was a Wolf player. You had, like, the 2 Sonics, which were Espy and X. You had a couple of other low-tier heroes. You had Poltergust's Yoshi. Like, there were a couple of one-off good players that played the bad characters. But, like, if you were to play a character that was like Mario in Brawl, who was, like, the edge of low-tier, he, in context to the game, is worse than every character in Ultimate, except maybe Ganondorf. But probably Ganondorf is still better, because the general strength of characters in this game, like Ganondorf, is at worst a 4 out of 10. Because Ganondorf has a lot of stuff. It's just, yeah, good luck playing against the 8s and the 9s all the time. You know what I'm saying?
Just as there are 2 Pyra/Mythra players in the top 10. In contrast, it's
Ban Aegis? Chat, shake? Ban Aegis? Aegis? Shake? Shake? I lost Cosmos, I'm down.
It's much harder to say that 4 Meta Knight solo mains in the top 10, plus 2 secondaries, is a sign of a...
Show me! I'm literally one of the... It's me and Larry got kept out. You could have just shown the full top 10. This is ESAM erasure. I'm 6. ADHD was 7. You can see the peak of Ice Climbers. You know this is me.
Another data point we can point to is the most recent character placement percentages from 2022, which instead of using rankings as a metric, gathers results directly from tournaments. As you can see here, Steve isn't even the most heavily represented character,
Nicole.
instead being overtaken by Rob, who you should keep in mind as he'll be relevant later in our discussion. Now, one common
ban everyone in the top 10?
Now, one common counterpoint to this is the idea of social pressure. Players feel a social pressure to not plank, as it ruins the experience not only as a player, but also as a spectator.
So true.
And it is true that there is significant social pressure pushing for people to not play Steve. Nearly every top Steve player has been on the receiving end of some degree of harassment from disgruntled spectators after winning events. Same thing happened in Smash 4 with the over-centralizing character Bayonetta. The spectators engaged in the exact same kinds of harassment, and despite that, numerous players switched over from their previous mains in favor of Bayo. And even beloved top players like Tweak and MKLeo picked her up as a secondary. This kind of behavior has not...
Well, I mean, to be fair, the harassment of players isn't really the character's fault, that's just the scene fucking sucks. So again, stop shitting on Steve players, regardless of the ban. It's really dumb. Don't do that.
not been replicated in ult.
Do it on your private. Don't do it on main. Do it on your private. Don't do it on stream. Don't just fucking complain to your friends.
And there are few enough top Steve players that we can go through each case individually to prove that. Akala, Onin, DD, and D-Dog all only started competing offline after picking up Steve.
Okay, to be fair, 4 of them are also children. They're all children. Akol is 16 or 17. Onin is the same. DD's like now 16, so he was like 14. And then D-Dog I think is 18 or 19. So like they're children.
A similar situation applies to Jake, who only started competing during the online era spurred on by the pandemic. This means that there are only 2 established offline top players who picked up Steve as a secondary, and 0 established top players who have switched to Steve as a main.
Chase, also secondary Steve, and that's why he got top 8 at Major Upset. He won half of his loser sets with Steve. But also, again, that's similar because you don't have to play the best character in the game in this game, even though Steve is the best character in the game, because you can just play other characters. The difference between the best character in the game and the 15th best character in the game isn't that big. Also, yeah, Syrup. I forgot about Syrup. Like, playing Bayonetta as opposed to playing Peach, huge difference. Because I think Peach was around 15 in Smash 4. But like 15 in Ultimate would probably be like Mario. Like, you're not going to tell me that Steve is significantly better than Mario. He's better, but he's not like super horseshit. And again, I'm not discounting your whole video because you're slightly wrong about a couple things, because there's a billion players and knowing all of them is impossible.
Now, again, all of this isn't to say that because Bayonetta and Meta Knight were banned, Steve isn't worthy of one either. Rather, this simply goes to show that as things currently stand, Steve has not over-centralized the meta, and therefore cannot be a tier 1 or 2 violation on the bannability scale.
I agree that he's not necessarily over-centralizing, but that's not because Steve shouldn't be, that's because people don't give a shit. Because again, there are enough good characters. That isn't because of Steve. Like, if you made half of the cast significantly worse, just like drop off the bottom 40 characters and they're bad, a lot more people would play Steve because there aren't going to be Isabel like as many Isabel and Villager and Mewtwo and Mii Gunner and blah 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 mains, because they're gonna just go to the high tiers and top tiers. Doesn't it mean it's balanced and not over centralized? That's just the game. That has nothing to do with Steve. Like, that's irrelevant to Steve, in my opinion.
The remaining basis for a Steve ban is the argument that he is degenerate, and therefore qualifies for a tier 3 on the bannability scale. There have been examples of the community banning things over tier 3 violations before. In Melee, wobbling, which we talked about when defining degeneracy, has been universally banned at all notable tournaments.
Also, it's funny to watch people be mad. which is still true with Steve. I agree. It's funny when people rage about Steve. To me, personally, love it. Like the nun tweet is like simply one of the best tweets ever.
Skills such as comboing, edge guarding, maintaining advantage, and securing kills. Traditional skills can be grouped into two main categories: neutral game and punish game.
Dude, Slug is
a
so
common
good.
talking point by people arguing for a Steve ban is that Steve skips certain parts of the game.
True.
But is that really true?
Yep.
While Steve's recovery is phenomenal in terms of distance,
True.
he's left very vulnerable for much of it, especially when recovering from below.
Not necessarily. Well, yeah, when recovering below, you get spiked, but also not super vulnerable. Like it's not. This recovery is pretty broken. Also, the hitbox is really good, and if you recover high, you have so many mix-ups that like it's.
When recovering
it's
horizontally, Steve relies heavily on minecart, which can be
broken.
pretty reliably spaced around and stuffed out at
with like 6 characters in the game.
a reactable range.
With like 6 characters in the game, you have to play a sword character. If you don't play a sword character, you simply don't do this.
The same applies to juggle situations where both anvil and minecart have pretty reliable counterplay.
Yeah, always be right, all the time.
But also in the sense that you have to wait for the items to despawn before you can use them again. Effectively.
Imagine if they didn't. You'd be able to you have like 6 iron and someone's off stage, just go minecart jump, just and they're just falling off the stage. That'd be fucking hilarious. Steve has so many bad matchups. It's actually funny when people say Steve is the best. He is the best. And he also has bad matchups because again, Ultimate is super balanced. Bayo had bad matchups. Bayo lost at least 2 matchups to Pika and to Diddy. Bayo lost 2 matchups. She was still the best character in the game.
Steve has to manage these resources in the same way.
The bad matchups in question. No, Steve actually loses like 3 or 4 matchups because he loses to Zero Suit, Shulk, Cloud, Sephiroth. I'll give those 4, at least. We're not saying Steve, like, people that want to ban Steve aren't saying Steve is unbeatably, brokenly, he can't lose. That's never, ever, ever been the point. Ever. And if you think it has been the point, you're missing it. True.
The elephant in the room here is the advanced technique known as Phantom MLG.
True.
This tech allows Steve, assuming...
Also, if you're wrong about, like, Zero Suit and stuff's disadvantage, they just get back to neutral, whereas Steve, if you're wrong, you get hit by Anvil and die at 60. Woohoo! We already went over most of the PLMG stuff, so I'm probably not going to be going that deep into it. No. Again, just to reiterate, because I don't know if Livy was here before, the reason that people don't use it is because, 1, Steve mains are really lazy. So lazy. Incredibly lazy. No top Steve player, no universally recognized national or international threat Steve player learned how to nil. There are 3 Steve players, in my opinion, that know how to nil, which is Connor from upstate New York or New York somewhere, Yofi, Failbot. Those are the only 3 Steve players, to me, that actually nil. It's broken. It is absurdly good. They don't care, because you don't need it, because this character's insane. Steve players are lazy as fuck, because you can just roll up tilt. And that's way better for the most part. They're not even better. It's easier. It's simpler. So they just don't care to learn the hard stuff. That actually is better. And again, what I said in the other video is there is no point to learning this technique and getting really, really good at it when most events have it banned anyway, because if you learn this and get it into your muscle memory and then use it at a tournament that it is banned because you're not thinking about it, you get DQ'd. So it's simply not worth it to learn, especially considering Steve is already broken. He doesn't need it. But if it was for sure known that this technique would not be banned and Steve would not be banned, and Steve players continue to not use it, it's because Steve mains are lazy and don't learn the broken shit anyway. Do you know how many Steve players I talk to that don't know, like, how to TBC or PBR or nil 3? That's not the character. That's not because it's not bannable. That's because Steve mains are stupid / lighthearted.
Aside from all this, Phantom MLG is just not that good.
It's really broken. I'm not going to go over this again.
Another advanced technique Steve has access to is a block no impact land.
True.
Or NIL. This is a 2-frame input that allows you to enter a grounded state on a block much faster than normal, allowing Steve to hit aerial opponents with his grounded normals when he otherwise wouldn't be able to.
Stupid.
This technique is required for any Steve player trying to optimize his punish game and land his infamous 0-to-death combo.
And it's crazy because then the best player in the world, aka Akola, doesn't use them. Sometimes he gets them. He gets them like once a tournament. Because this character's broken.
Combos in order to pull them off in the first place. Steve undeniably not only requires traditional punish skills to succeed, but when played optimally, requires them more than most other characters on the roster. In fact, these optimizations are so difficult that no top player has been capable of consistently doing them in bracket.
They're really not that hard. Every Steve main's just lazy.
As of right now. And perhaps the Steve with the most technical punish game of them all, Yofi, has never won an offline bracket.
Yofi only went to like 2 before you made this video. Yofi's not an offline player. Back off my man's Yofi.
Went 2-2 at their only offline major, proving—
Back off my man's Yofi. Because that's, again, this is all /J, just in case we're unaware. Back off my man's Yofi.
Steve also does not bypass the traditional skills required for the neutral game.
Yes, he does.
Sure, when Steve has the lead, he is incentivized to camp out the opponent.
Yep.
But this is far from a uniquely Steve trait.
Yeah, except that most characters, when they camp, aren't gaining game-winning materials for the rest of the game.
As the situation isn't really all that different from things many characters can do, such as Samus holding a charge shot under the platform.
That is incredible. That's so much different. It's literally so different. If Steve's materials went back to 0, or whatever like his neutral material amount would be when he died, fine, I would agree. That's not the case. If you give Steve space and he's mining, he gets, like, on first stock, beginning of the game, he gets diamond, he gets multiple golds, multiple irons, he's set for the rest of the game. Again, barring specific matchups, barring them mashing a lot. But like, Samus doing this is you have to deal with charge shot once. And then again, and then again and again and again, but having one charge shot doesn't make your game better later. It just means charge shot's a really good move, which it is. Charge shot's broken.
The Sonic spin dashing in the corner.
Same thing.
Another common argument I see is that this situation negates the traditional advantages of stage control, but this also isn't true. A Steve main mining behind a wall at center stage will still have more options and is in a better position than a Steve main mining behind a wall in the corner.
True.
Steve mining in front of a wall in the corner could be considered more problematic, as if he gets hit off—
That's just broken. I don't know why more people don't do this, it's so absurd.
Stage here, he's able to tech and punish the opponent, giving him a unique advantage when lacking stage control. This can and has been played around with things such as vertical hits, grabs and command grabs, etc. While Steve has many strengths, the vast majority of them are not Steve specific. Think about it for a second. Extremely safe tilts with insane rewards, a combination of very good zoning and extremely good close range, a recovery with insane distance and many mix-ups, cheese 0 to deaths off safe options. Every single one of these applies to Rob, and that character has an arguably lower barrier to entry, and by some metrics, better results.
Metrics does he have better results? A Rob other than Zachary has never won a major. Steve has won 1 billion. That one chart, that's not results, that's popularity. It's not the same thing.
Claiming that Steve players only lose by their own fault and that their opponent's use of counterplay was irrelevant is purposefully reductive and shows a complete lack of understanding of how competitive games actually work. Not only that, it dehumanizes Steve players by reducing them to not a player, but a problem that needs to be solved.
Listen, I don't like how people treat Steve players, but people being mean to Steve players doesn't mean Steve should be legal. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I don't get it.
With that, we've established that Steve is not over-centralizing and that he isn't devoid of the traditional skills required to win.
So the thing is, Steve doesn't get to skip the entire portions of the game. He doesn't get to ignore disadvantage, even though he kind of, like, the thing is, he doesn't get to ignore these spaces, right? But he gets to be clearly one of the best ones in all those aspects. Steve's neutral is crazy because just of the normals, right? And then also minecart and anvil and footstool out of shield and really crazy risk reward in forward air and back air, and also then blocks. You also don't have to worry about the traditional thing of shield pressure because up tilt simply beats shield pressure. Sorry, shield options. And you just hold A. You don't have to time anything. Like, it is, as someone that has really tried to learn it, like super hard, it is so much easier to counterplay Rob down tilt than it is Steve up tilt. And also, Rob down tilt pushes you, like if you shield Rob down tilt a lot, you get pushed away slowly and you back up. If that happens with Steve, he just walks towards you with up tilt and you actually have to guess, but the guess is really out of your favor because parrying it is so difficult, and sometimes parrying it doesn't matter because then you have to, after the parry, if the Steve reacts, which again, no one's even parrying the up tilt, so it doesn't even matter. But like if you parry the up tilt, then you have to guess jump through you or jump backwards. So you either have to jump and do an aerial right here or do it here, or hope that you have something like a swatting move that also still has to be framed like 6. Because if it's slower than that, Steve can go up tilt shield or up tilt spot dodge. So he kind of gets to skip neutral and yeah, read the roll, right? Like read the roll. But saying that Rob is like Steve isn't really fair because Rob is big. So like really it's super different. And by that I mean, you know, Rob doesn't get to change the layout of the stage. And you can take gyro. Also, he doesn't have a something that if you try to jump and juggle him, it kills you at 70. And also has literally no armor. Is Steve up till the best normal in the game? Probably still electric. A misunderstanding her point was that painting Steve as a problem to be solved is reductive in terms of not accounting for player skill at all. I mean, sure. But also, again, people saying that Steve is a problem and it's reductive of player skill are also being babies about it. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be saying, wow, Steve mains are all fucking carried. That's a community problem, not a Steve problem, but that doesn't mean that Steve isn't horseshit. And doesn't do a bunch of crazy stuff. Like, the community being rude and Steve being broken should be two entirely separate things.
Or we could do to mitigate this problem that isn't outright banning Steve. We could change the stage list to include stages like Lylat and Yoshi's Story.
Hell yeah, back on board. Fuck yeah, this video is great. 10 out of 10, subscribe, bye. Yoshi's and Lylat, back on board, baby. Let's go. Yes. Yes. Excellent video. No critiques. Wonderful. Hell yeah. Everything she said was right. Absolutely correct.
Assuming Steve needs to be banned because he's a problem under our current format is like saying Sonic should be banned due to his ability to circle camp on Hyrule Temple.
So true. Should be. Yep. Spitting. Sonic should be banned. So true. But also, again, while I don't hate this solution, to be honest, like, I think this is a cool way to think about it. Saying this character's not broken so because we can just legalize stages when these stages have problems in and of themselves, regardless if I personally agree or disagree with them having problems. I think both these stages should be legal, especially in character first rule sets. Like, absolutely they should be legal because you just ban them if you don't like them as characters. That doesn't mean Steve's not broken. That just means he bans Lylat and Yoshi's and then goes to fucking Small Battlefield. I don't think there's an objective reason why Steve must be banned, but I do think banning him might lead to more people coming to tournaments. I don't think he's absolutely 100% bannable. Again, without PMLG, I don't think Steve should be banned at all. He's just absurd. He's just broken. That doesn't mean that banning him wouldn't be good. And again, that's just my opinion. If you think it matters, cool, good for you. Have a different opinion. You don't need to have my opinion. I'm not trying to convince everyone. I know a lot. And I am kind of in the middle of ban Steve or not ban Steve. Like, I don't think Steve should be banned, and then PMLG exists, and I think Steve should be banned.
Assuming Steve is a problem is just letting players adapt. When people bring this up, they're often met with a sarcastic response of, don't you think that if Steve counterplay existed, top players would have figured it out?
Nope, top players suck. Like, top players are simultaneously so goddamn good and so bad. Like, it is hilarious how bad some top players are, and then they beat your ass, and you're like, how are you so good while being so bad? It is on the players to not quit, but also, why do we care more about one character than the health of the scene? If that's where people are coming from, and that's where, like, the TOs are coming from, and they have seen a dip in registration at their locals or their regionals because this one character exists and they want to preserve the health of their meta and their players, banning Steve is 100% fine. And it makes 100% sense. If they don't want to ban Steve, that also makes sense. It's up to them. Which is why this will never ever be a universal thing one way or the other.
Since the pandemic began, HBox has only won a single major event.
Hungrybox did content and didn't grind like the insane Melee players that grinded for 2 years during COVID because Hungrybox realized it was better for his career to stream Ultimate. He basically quit Melee for like a year. So yeah, players are gonna get better than him. Also, Cody is really good, so is so like all the players are crazy. Also, if you want to wait 4 years for a character in this game to get counterplay, when the new game will probably be out by then, that's silly.
This isn't true. We have the ledge grab limit, which M2K stalled on the ledge way more than HBox.
Hell yeah, let's go.
We also have the rising pound stall, which
that existed forever.
HBox basically never did, so I don't know where this idea comes from, in all honesty. I really don't.
The internet is dumb, ignore randoms.
It isn't about degeneracy, or over-centralization, or counterplay, or competitive integrity, or any of the
Again, I don't like this argument because people are assholes. People are assholes, and that has nothing to do with Steve should be banned or not. This is just people being shitty. And people shouldn't do this, regardless of if Steve got banned. I fucking hate the people in my comments, you motherfuckers in the comments, when I talk about a cola, they go, actually, a cola isn't even good. If Steve was banned, Japan, like literally in the video I uploaded today as of recording, people were like, a cola isn't even that good. If they banned Steve, Japan wouldn't be better than North America. And I'm like, shut the fuck up. Shut up.
I think Waidu said it best. Banning Steve, given his current results, contains an implicit admission that we can ban things because we don't like them. This was simply the only logical next step. Yes, Steve players can always switch to another character, but they shouldn't have to. And at this rate, there's no guarantee the top tier they switch to won't just end up banned as well.
It's so funny to me that Waidu's picking up Kazuya and then like immediately afterwards, the Texas people banned Kazuya. I found that so funny.
People play this game as a career. We run events with thousands of dollars and the pride of hundreds.
If a local scene is dying and the way to bring it back is banning a character, that does not mean that like the character's banned everywhere. Nor does it mean that's a bad decision, because I would rather have a scene that exists without one or two characters than I would not have the scene. Like, in my opinion, having a healthy scene is way more important than a scene with every character in the game in it. And again, I'm saying this as someone that I don't really care if Steve gets banned, right? I'm not a Steve hater. I'm not a Steve lover. I mean, so honestly, I like Steve more than I dislike him, but if he gets banned, fine. If he doesn't get banned, fine. But critiquing TOs for doing what they think is best for their scene, because their scene halves in numbers, is ridiculous. And I don't think that any one person has the fucking authority to say anything about that unless you are either in that scene or a TO in that area. Like, again, do I wish people complained less? Absolutely. People complain about stuff all the time. Top players complain about stuff all the time. I fucking hated when Akola won Game Invitational and then 5 other players said hashtag ban Steve. I thought that was so immature and so bitch made. I thought it was fucking awful. I thought that was so disrespectful. That has nothing to do with if I think Steve should actually be banned or not. And it shouldn't have anything to do with if you think Steve should be banned or not. Because that's just people being assholes. And people being assholes should not be the determiner on what is or is not going to be legal at majors. And at locals, if people are going to leave the scene, like multiple, like dozens of people are going to leave the scene because of a character, that's fine. Whether they leave and you don't ban the character, or they leave, you ban the character and they come back. Both are acceptable. But at the same time, you risk those people that want to go to majors getting the experience against those characters. If you live in a Steve banned region and you go to a Steve legal major and you get blown up by a Steve, that's your fault. Complain to your TOs about it, right? I do think people bring their complaints onto the internet way too much and they should just talk to their TOs. But also, that doesn't have anything to do with if Steve should be banned or not. And pretending that people being dicks, therefore, like, people are mean, therefore we shouldn't ban Steve, is silly. And in my opinion, does not make sense. I didn't dislike that video that much, I just disagree with some points. Because again, I feel like a lot of it was like, people are mean. And also, I don't think Steve is degenerate, which, like, that can vary from person to person, so your definition of what is degenerate, not like Livy's, but like your, whoever it is. Any one person's opinion of what is degenerate or not should not necessarily dictate what other people think is degenerate or not. Right? Mewtwo King complained so much when Scrooging got banned, because he was like one of the only people that did it, because he played a non-interactive ass Meta Knight. At the same time, you have people saying, oh my god, I don't know why people don't respect Sonics. People do respect Sonics, they just don't like fucking watching Sonic, and not liking watching Sonic is fine. Don't be mean to the Sonic players. Like, just shut up, and wait until the next set happens. Like, stop complaining in every Sonics vs. Gluto set that it goes for 47 minutes, because it's just a matchup. Don't be a dick. But also, people being a dick is irrelevant to Sonic being a good character. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're two separate issues. The community is immature and irresponsible with how they do things and how they say things. Not necessarily TOs, but just like the overall, like, especially the online community. These characters are really good and annoying to deal with. Those are two separate issues that, like, coincide a little bit, but they're not the same thing.